Hey everyone, welcome back to Out of Spec Guide. I'm Max, and behind me, filming me, is my colleague Ryan, whose Tesla Model 3 this is. This week, we're testing the Hyundai Ioniq 6, and these two vehicles combined have kind of put this thought in my head that this stereotype that electric cars are necessarily expensive, or at least you need an expensive one to have a livable, daily good one, is really no longer true. Case in point, these two guys, where you have the Tesla Model 3 with like the world's best charging network, so much good software and technology, and then you have the Hyundai Ioniq 6, which has amazing charging, really decent interior, well-spec'd ventilated seats you can option, again, the fast charging, really good technology, superbly efficient, delivering on range for less money. So the days of, oh, if I want all-wheel drive, I want good range, I want good charging, I'm going to be spending, luxury car money, are not necessarily true. And we'll talk about this once we drive, but Brian and I drive a lot of expensive, really nice electric vehicles all the time, and I gotta be honest, they're not always my favorite. Oftentimes, they're technologically behind what I would argue, leaders in this industry, like Tesla and companies like Hyundai, are often doing in their vehicles. So basically, more money, more problems. You don't necessarily have to spend more to get a great electric car, because some of the best ones are the actual affordable ones. Okay, Ryan, we're in the Ioniq 6 that we're testing this week. You're actually about to do a 10% challenge on this. So for those of you who are into the efficiency side of things and watch Out of Spec reviews, you should check that out. But Ryan, what I want to talk about today is the EV myth used to be that they were expensive and luxury. I'm thinking early cars like the Tesla Model S. Honestly, ones like the Lucid Air now, which are really nice, right? Like we're talking luxury spec, doesn't matter, sedan or SUV, but approaching six-digit like price territory, very fast, very well optioned, all those things. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. Basically because of cars like the one you drive every day.
Certainly. I mean, it was the case just only a few years ago. You were pretty limited in your options. It was mainly luxury vehicles with price tags north of $60,000, $70,000+. But that's no longer the case. There's tons of options in the $50,000 range, even the $40,000 and sometimes $30,000 range. There's a lot of very good, compelling options that can fit a lot of people's needs.
Yep. And it used to be that these options were beset and plagued by compromise. To be honest, like what was the car you had before the Tesla Model 3? Great vehicle, but your outlay on it wasn't that much cheaper, right, than what you bought the Model 3 for, with incentives, to be fair. But with that Bolt, I mean, you had a car with, okay, acceptable range, but the charging performance wasn't great.
That's it. That's exactly right. And again, that's the reality that it used to be. If you wanted to get a cheaper car, you would make those kinds of sacrifices. But again, that's no longer the case. There's plenty of options now that are really compelling and don't have a lot of those shortcomings.
Yep. So we mentioned, the Model 3, of course, is one. And then the Ioniq 6, this one, which is also, I would tag in the Ioniq 5 in this conversation for those who prefer the SUV body style, or maybe like the styling of that better. I actually like this a lot. But I've got to say, having driven this one for a few days, I'm just struck by how impressively quiet it is on the inside here. Okay, it's not a Mercedes S-Class, but it is nicer than a Model 3 in my opinion in that way, and it's offering something of its own while also just not being compromised in any of the core areas. So between this and Model 3 and an entry-level Polestar 2, that's three compelling car-shaped affordable EVs you can buy right now.
Absolutely, and I'd just actually like to highlight some of those points that you made. First impressions in this car are really, really positive. Even though these are on bigger wheels, I think the ride is significantly better in this Ioniq 6 compared to my Model 3. There's a lot of really nice stuff I like about this. Just a lot of the touch points, the technology seems pretty solid, and as you've mentioned, the efficiency is something that's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, and this really gets down to the point of I want to get down to what you said, technology and efficiency. Those are key words. It used to be in combustion land, what did we associate with premium, luxury, more expensive cars? Usually things like performance and ride quality and quietness. And a lot of these things, every EV past a point has, right? I would argue performance in this being sub 5 seconds 0 to 60 because of the dual motor Ioniq 6, plenty fast enough. Your Model 3, even rear wheel drive, 5.8 seconds 0 to 60, quick enough for most people.
Yeah, and being completely honest, even the Chevy Bolt, entry-level cars like the Nissan Leaf, they've got plenty of performance. It's not like the econo boxes of yesteryear. You've got decent performance, and especially with an electric powertrain, you've got a lot of power available instantaneously.
Yes, and they're all relatively efficient and high in technology. And so on the efficiency point of things, interestingly, it's often the cheaper electric cars that are more efficient. And this is true in gas land too, because they're smaller. But, a gas car that's small and efficient because it has a small engine would, maybe not be very performant, not very fun to drive. Maybe it would make a whining noise because it has some four-cylinder and it's a turbocharger and some bad transmission. You don't have those issues in EVs.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking of cars that'll get like 40-ish miles per gallon, and those are not going to be as nice of a driving experience, in my opinion, as an EV with all the power, all the torque, and it's still quieter.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of someone like, Kyle's dad, Out of Spec Dave on YouTube. He sold his Lucid Air recently, but he would go between that and his Model 3, and he'd always say, you know what, it's not like he didn't notice a difference. Obviously, the Lucid Air it's a nice, expensive vehicle, but he said the Model 3, in terms of a daily driver, was enough for him. And that's, coming from a person who's owned lots of cars and us too, having the privilege of driving press cars, we drive a lot of nice cars that are really quick and have superb, luxury accoutrements, really nice sound systems, really well insulated. The Audi e-tron I was in recently, feels like a bank vault, as Kyle likes to say. You drove the Mercedes AMG EQE SUV. I'm sure that was very nice. And yet, those nice things are not, I would argue, actually worth the money, at least to me, in an EV, because you get those plus the other things we've been talking about in gas cars that you don't get in cheap gas cars. But in an EV, you get so much as standard with this new crop of EVs that all have good charging, good range, and optionable all-wheel drive, whatever people may like. I mean, you're getting all of that now. Why spend, let's say that e-tron I was in, $90,000 on that versus $50,000 for a well-optioned Ioniq 5? I'm thinking, when I'm in this could almost be a Genesis. And maybe there will be a Genesis version of this that's nicer, I'm sure, in some ways. But it's almost hard, I would say, for companies like Hyundai and Tesla, who lead in technology and efficiency, to actually differentiate their products because their base products are so good, right? This, I gotta say, I don't love the software the most. Is the software much better in a Genesis? Not really. In your Model 3, Ryan, the software stack and the screen is very similar to what someone would have in a Model S or a Model X. Granted, they'd have a driver display, but that's about it.
Certainly, and I think the point that you're starting to get at is that in EVs especially, you were reaching the points of diminishing returns a lot earlier than we used to see in gas cars a lot of the time.
Yeah, diminishing returns is a great way of putting it, or I would just say an acceptably high baseline. And perhaps this is because batteries are frankly still expensive, and EVs, of course, I'm not going to say they're cheap. $40,000 starting price for a lot of these, what I would call, livable EVs as a daily only driver for most people. It's not particularly cheap, but cars are getting so expensive. And so the rationale, I would suppose, is if you're an auto manufacturer, is we're selling the car at this price, we might as well option it with heated front seats as standard, right? And so you get all of the basic things people would want. And it almost seems like the way that, let's say, brands like Mercedes and Audi and these traditional luxury brands are distinguishing themselves is through gimmicks that honestly I don't need. Maybe some people like, but do I need my car to have the world's most advanced built-in voice assistant or a three-dimensional ball on screen that shows how I'm doing on efficiency? No.
Yeah, I think certainly there's a lot of things that can differentiate those more expensive cars, and if you want those cars, certainly get them. It's your decision to make that, but I do think the base entry-level versions of a lot of vehicles and a lot of EVs at the entry-level prices are extremely good values, and they're a really great they're a really great place to spend time.
Yeah, right now we're seeing so many people get out of I can just think of people I know who are leasing, let's say, an X5, BMW luxury SUV, and they get into a Model Y, and they don't care. And granted, if you are a car person or an enthusiast, or you have a connection to these brands, that may mean something to you. I would argue that it means more if you're considering a gas car, because you get the engine and the noise and the character. And I'm not being cynical and saying EVs have no character, they have no personality, but we've been saying, Ryan, the efficiency, the powertrain, they're all fairly similar in all EVs. And it's not even like the expensive ones are that quick, because the expensive ones usually, to be quick and still have good range, need bigger batteries, which means they're heavier. So it's not like you're paying for more performance until you get to like Lucid Air, like Sapphire territory. Of course, yes, that's a world of difference, but that's not normal buyers.
Right, and I think the difference between like a Model S, which is a heck of a lot more expensive than the nicest Model 3, is not necessarily as big as that price gap is. And furthermore, the base level Model 3 is an even better value than that top spec Model 3, I think.
Yeah, but the top spec Model 3 performance, as it exists right now, is still $54,000, which is similar to the price of this Ioniq 6. And obviously, it's way quicker than the Ioniq 6. It's way quicker than a lot of gas cars and a lot of premium luxury EVs. And I'm not saying numbers and these specs are the only things that matter to you. There are other intangibles. There are other elements of content. But I feel like it's getting narrowed down so much over time. What is it? The new Model 3 refresh is going to have ventilated seats. That used to be a big distinguishing thing of you have to get Model S or a Mercedes EQE sedan or a higher class vehicle. And now all of the features that I feel like people would normally care about are there. And that's controversial, Ryan. You may disagree with me here, but I think all of this software and technology and the, in my opinion, over-engineered ways the luxury brands are differentiating themselves, they're not doing them any favors.
Yeah, I think, it's the manufacturers are in a tough spot. They have forever basically had these trim levels and more expensive versions of the cars, but it just doesn't lend itself super well to EVs, I don't think. And I think you're on the same page with me on that.
Yeah,
it's a really challenging thing for them to tackle, and some of them I think are doing it better than others. I know there are some manufacturers that tend to hide a lot of the features that you would expect behind options, or you have to spec up to the nicer trim to get that feature.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that we really have to credit, we started this example with what we're in, the Hyundai Ioniq 6, but also your Tesla Model 3. Tesla and Hyundai Motor Group broadly, in my opinion, are two brands emphasize where the auto industry, EVs, and value for consumers is going. Because Tesla, as a technology and software company, does not need to differentiate its models with features like, oh, this one has a heated steering wheel. It's nope, we're going to spec all of the cars with it. You have that. If we want more money, we're going to charge you for autopilot or if FSD, right? Full autopilot FSD upgrades like that lots of Tesla people are into, but maybe if you're not a autonomous driving enthusiast testing the bleeding edge, you don't need, and that's $6,000 or $12,000 you could save, right? And that's how they've chosen to distinguish themselves. And then you have Hyundai, who for years in gas car land has been, I think, notable for speccing all of their SUVs and sedans and vehicles with really good options as standard equipment. I'm thinking of things like adaptive cruise control, all of the driver assist systems that we take for granted as being standard today. This brand was early on in making that standard, where until very recently, even still with some brands, you have to pay extra to get that, which I just think is not, it's not the benchmark in today's world.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth mentioning is there are a few instances in the Ioniq 5 and 6 where they have some features that are locked behind higher trims. For example, ventilated seats are only available on the highest trims, but for the most part, the base level trims are really well equipped, and you're not going to be feeling like you're in an economy car by any means.
Yeah. It's almost yes, that's a good point. You've got to get the limited to get ventilated seats in the sunroof in the Ioniq 5 and the Ioniq 6, but you spend, this MSRP is $56,000. Again, not nothing. It's not cheap, but I would argue it's affordable because you compare that to Mercedes EQE sedan. We're looking well into $70,000 plus territory. Again, the badge and the brand may mean something to you, and nothing is going to replace that. And so I think that's the strongest thing they have to go off of, but in terms of the straight line performance, in terms of so much of the content and the features that used to distinguish it, it just doesn't exist anymore. And software is down to each brand. I would argue that Hyundai and Kia, for all of the amazing things they're doing with the praise I've given this car, how quiet it is, how well engineered it is, their software's not great. And that's an area where Tesla beats them and just about everybody else. And so that's going to be okay, the first brand who has software that's close to as good as Tesla's, is gonna have an interesting advantage, not just in one model, but their entire lineup of cars compared to every other brand.
Certainly, I agree with that.
And I think as we're looking towards the future, more EVs are going to come out on the market. Right now, it's weird to compare some of these models because they're not directly comparable, but we have to compare them because there's just not that many EVs out on the market at the moment. So I think if we get more and more luxury EVs, they will find ways to set themselves apart. Right now, it's just like, to put it more specifically, right, highest end trim of an Ioniq 6 versus the EQE or something like that. There's just this huge price gap, and I'm just not seeing the justification. It's not coming with more range. It's not coming with better charging. This car has like technology that's in many ways better than its more expensive counterparts. And the Model 3, by virtue of Tesla being vertically integrated and so far ahead of everyone in the EV game, has, let's just say, better charging built in than just about anyone else.
Yes, and one thing to point out is that's true for now. Hopefully that will change in the near future, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, the charging advantage specifically. I think Tesla's always going to try to use technology and software to differentiate themselves. Right. So basically, brands, I think, if you're a buyer, this is a great time to be in the market, because unless you have a specific need for a luxury car, or want that distinction, maybe you do. Maybe it means something to you to drive a BMW and Mercedes badge, and I won't take it away from you to do that, because obviously we buy cars based off looks and perception. That's just an inevitable fact. But if you're just one of those buyers who cares about a comfortable, quiet commuter, having enough range, having enough charging, the long and short of it is that you don't need to buy an expensive EV anymore. And therefore, I would argue that EVs really aren't expensive by necessity. They're expensive if you want them to be, but so many of the features that you probably care about are in that standard EV. Maybe you have to, spec up the trim a bit, but that's still much cheaper than buying a significantly more expensive, class up of model.
Right.
All right, so yeah, Lucid Air, Tesla Model S Plaid now, which by the way has actually itself gotten cheaper a lot relatively recently. But anyhow, these, flagship vehicles, the Mercedes EQS SUV, you can buy them and they exist. But with electric cars in particular, so many of the benefits you used to associate with luxury and premium cars in gas world, I would argue, just aren't around anymore. It sounds like you agree with me on a lot of these points, Ryan. And so I'm super curious for all of you, do you have stories like, I bought an ID4 with massaging seats, I didn't need the Audi Q4 e-tron? Do you have scenarios where you found the value of a standard EV has been better for you than a, comparable luxury model? Or if you're shopping EVs, are you curious, do you think there's some distinction we've really missed here that luxury still kind of, has its big advantage in? So far, I think it's clear that a few flashy features and the brand, those are undeniable. They're always going to be there. But a lot of the other core competencies, they exist in the base EVs now, as it honestly should be, because I think if we want EVs to be around, we need affordable ones. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Ryan, any more thoughts before we close this off?
No, I'm also interested to hear if anyone has any differing opinions, if perhaps they think there are some vehicles that they think are luxury upgrades but are worth that extra money.
Yeah, for sure. Please tell us if you know any exceptions to this rule. But man, I am really impressed by both the Model 3 and the Ioniq 6 in particular, because I think Tesla and Hyundai are just emblematic of where this industry is going and where the new standard is. I'm, for one, am all here for it. Anyhow, I've been Max.
I'm Ryan.
This has been Out of Spec Guide. See you in the next one. Bye.